She was only an intern, young, overlooked, invisible in a place where power decided who mattered. Every morning she carried quiet dreams into a building where her skin color spoke louder than her resume. No one expected her to stand out. No one cared enough to notice her kindness. But then, in a single moment, everything changed. A stranger walked through those doors, someone different, someone vulnerable. And while others looked away, she chose compassion. With just her hands, she built a bridge that few dared to cross. What she didn't know was that another pair of eyes was watching. Eyes that belonged to the very top of the company. And what happened next would shake the walls of that institution, exposing truths hidden in plain sight. This is not just her story. It's a story about how the smallest act of humanity can reveal the deepest prejudice. The question is, are we ready to face it? Her name was Maya. 19 years old, soft-spoken, and carrying the quiet determination of someone who had learned early that life rarely offered second chances. She was the first in her family to step into the polished, glass-walled offices of a prestigious company downtown. To most people, she was just the black intern, temporary, replaceable, easy to ignore. But to her mother and younger brother, she was proof that hard work and faith could carve open doors that had long stayed shut. Each morning she rose before sunrise, ironing the same few outfits until the fabric grew thin, packing leftovers in a worn lunch container, and riding the crowded bus that took her past the wealth she didn't yet belong to. She sat quietly in the back of meetings, taking notes no one would read, smiling at people who barely remembered her name. Still, she held her head high. Being in that office, no matter how invisible she felt, meant she was closer to the dreams she carried. The walls of that company sparkled with ambition, but beneath the surface lay currents she had already begun to feel. Conversations paused when she entered the room. Compliments came wrapped in surprise, as if competence itself was unexpected. Every mistake she made felt amplified, while her small victories went unnoticed. Maya had learned to navigate it with silence, swallowing her discomfort the way generations before her had done. Outside those walls, her world was simpler. At home, she laughed freely with her little brother as they watched cartoons. She listened to her mother hum gospel songs while folding laundry late into the night. These small, ordinary moments gave her the strength to face each new day. For her, the internship wasn't just a line on a resume, it was hope. Hope that one day her family's sacrifices would be worth it. Still, there was a weight she couldn't shake. Each day she entered that office, she wondered how long she could keep proving herself to people who had already decided what box she belonged in. She wanted to be seen not as a token, not as an exception, but as someone whose skills mattered. Yet the stares, the dismissive tone, the subtle barriers, they all whispered the same message: you don't belong here. And then came the morning that would change everything. It started like any other, Maya clutching her backpack, stepping off the bus, passing the gleaming front doors she'd polished countless times with her own reflection. She took a deep breath, preparing herself for another day of silence, of invisibility. But she couldn't know that beyond those doors, a single encounter was waiting to test everything she believed about herself, and about the world around her. A visitor would arrive, someone who carried their own struggle, their own quiet isolation. And Maya, without planning it, without even thinking twice, would reach across that silence with an act of humanity. What she didn't know was that her choice, so small in the moment, would be watched. Judged. And in the shadows of that building's power, her kindness would spark something she never expected. Because sometimes, the most ordinary beginnings hide the stories that echo the loudest. Maya's day began like any other, but the air inside the building felt different. The polished marble floors seemed colder, the voices sharper. She hurried past the reception desk with a polite smile that went unanswered, settling into her corner with the quiet precision she had learned. Her work was always thorough, but rarely acknowledged. She was the kind of employee people overlooked until they needed something done. That morning, whispers moved across the office. A high-level visitor was expected, a potential partner, someone with influence. Maya, of course, wasn't briefed. Interns didn't need to know. But she felt the weight of anticipation pressing down on the walls. By mid-morning, the visitor arrived. A man, older, well-dressed, but with a stillness about him. As he approached the reception desk, it became obvious, he was deaf. His gestures, deliberate but strained, fell flat against the indifference of the staff. The receptionist fumbled, muttered awkwardly, and finally waved him aside, treating his presence as an inconvenience rather than a welcome. The man's shoulders sank. Maya watched from a distance, her chest tightening. She remembered her high school volunteer hours at a community center, where she'd learned the basics of sign language. For her, it was simple respect, a way to make people feel seen. Without hesitation, she walked toward him, her hands moving carefully, spelling out, "Can I help you?" The man's eyes lit up instantly. Relief softened his features as he responded in fluid signs. Maya translated with ease, guiding him to where he needed to go. For a brief moment, the noise of the office faded. It was just two human beings communicating, bridging a gap others had ignored. But not everyone was moved by her kindness. Behind the glass walls of an executive office, someone was watching. Arms crossed, eyes narrowed. To them, this wasn't compassion, it was disruption. Word spread quickly through the floor. The intern had stepped in where full-time staff had failed. Some laughed it off. Others whispered that she was showing off. To Maya's surprise, no one congratulated her. No pat on the back. Instead, she felt a shift, a tightening of the invisible boundaries that already boxed her in. The next day, her supervisor piled extra tasks on her desk. Tedious, unrelated assignments that kept her isolated. When she asked for clarification, she was told, "If you have time to play around with visitors, you have time for this." She swallowed her frustration, burying herself in work. But the message was clear, know your place. Days stretched into weeks, and the memory of that encounter refused to leave her. She hadn't done it for recognition, she had simply acted on instinct. Yet somehow, her small act of humanity had unsettled the fragile balance of the office. She began to notice the sidelong glances, the hushed tones when she entered a room. Still, she carried on. Until the next test came. It was a quarterly strategy meeting, one of those gatherings where executives spoke in polished phrases while interns were expected to sit silently in the back. Maya took her usual place near the door, notebook open, ready to transcribe every word. Halfway through, a technical issue disrupted the presentation. The slides froze, and silence filled the room. Frustration grew as attempts to fix it failed. Maya hesitated, then raised her hand timidly. "I think I can help," she offered. The room went still. One executive arched a brow. Another smirked. But the silence gave her permission. She stepped forward, adjusted the connections, and within moments, the screen lit back up. The solution was simple, but the room reacted as though she had stepped out of line. A low chuckle rippled from the back. "Guess interns think they're IT now." The words stung sharper than they should have. She returned to her seat, cheeks burning, notebook trembling in her hands. It wasn't just a joke. It was a reminder. A reminder that no matter how helpful she was, no matter how competent, her presence was tolerated, not welcomed. The weeks that followed became heavier. Assignments doubled. Deadlines shrank. Small mistakes, typos, formatting errors, were magnified, dissected in front of others. Meanwhile, her ideas were dismissed, only to reappear later credited to someone else. At home, she masked her exhaustion, assuring her mother that everything was fine. She couldn't bring herself to admit how draining it was to smile through the quiet hostility. She clung to her paycheck, her family's pride, and the slim hope that enduring it would open doors later. But deep down, she wondered, why did compassion feel like a crime? One evening, as Maya packed her things, a janitor, a kind woman who had worked there for years, paused by her desk. Leaning closer, she whispered, "Be careful, honey. They don't like when someone like you stands out too much." The word sent a chill through her. Someone like her. She knew what it meant. Not just an intern. Not just young. Black. The warning echoed in her mind long after the woman left. For the first time, Maya realized the hostility wasn't random, it was systemic, ingrained, waiting for her to step 1 inch out of line. The next morning, she arrived early, only to find a note left carelessly on her desk. 3 words, scrawled in sharp ink, "Know your place." Her chest tightened. Her hands trembled as she folded the note and slipped it into her bag. She couldn't prove who left it. She couldn't even speak of it without risking disbelief, or worse, retaliation. But she knew, this was no longer just subtle exclusion. This was a warning. And yet, she refused to crumble. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and carried on. But every step, every glance, carried the weight of suspicion. Someone wanted her silence. Someone wanted her gone. What Maya didn't know was that the eyes watching her from that glass office were still following every move. The visitor she had helped weeks earlier had not been just a man passing through. He was someone far more powerful. And the story was about to take a turn no one expected. Because the smallest act of kindness had lit a fuse. And now, the explosion was coming. The day began with quiet unease. Maya had grown used to the hostile notes, the whispered comments, the deliberate obstacles in her way. But this morning, something felt different. The building buzzed with anticipation again, another high-level meeting, another opportunity for the interns to fade into the background. She walked through the glass doors with her chin high, but her stomach knotted. Every instinct told her she was walking into something bigger than herself. By noon, the conference room was full. Executives in tailored suits, polished shoes clicking against the floor, filled the long table. Maya was directed to the back, her notebook ready as always. The atmosphere was thick with authority, the kind that demanded silence from anyone without rank. And then, he walked in. The visitor from weeks ago. The man she had helped with sign language. The man who had been ignored, dismissed, treated like an inconvenience. Only now, he wasn't just a visitor. He was seated at the head of the table. The CEO. A ripple of shock moved across the room, but no one dared to show it openly. Maya's heart skipped. She had spoken to him, helped him, unaware of who he truly was. Now, here he was, commanding the very space where she had been made to feel so small. The meeting began. Discussions of numbers, projections, and strategies flowed like rehearsed scripts. But the CEO's eyes scanned the room differently, searching, evaluating, remembering. Then it happened. Midway through the meeting, one of the executives, a man who had long dismissed Maya, began presenting a project proposal. His words rolled smoothly, but as Maya's eyes moved over the slides, recognition struck her. The proposal wasn't his. It was hers. The same idea she had submitted weeks earlier, brushed aside as not practical. Now, dressed up with minor changes, it was being paraded as someone else's brilliance. Her chest tightened. Heat rose to her face. She looked around the room, no one noticed, or worse, no one cared. The man's voice grew louder, confident, claiming credit for work that wasn't his. And then, like salt in a wound, he added, "We're always looking for innovation, even when it comes from unexpected places. But some ideas just need more polish than interns can provide." Laughter followed. Controlled, polite, but sharp enough to cut. Maya's hand shook as she scribbled in her notebook, not from nerves but from rage. She wanted to speak, to shout, to expose the truth, but she had been warned. She knew how this place operated. One word out of line, and she could be erased. But then, she noticed the CEO watching. Not the presentation. Not the room. Watching her. His eyes narrowed, studying her reaction, as if piecing together a puzzle no one else could see. The executive finished with a smug smile, awaiting approval. Silence filled the air, heavy, expectant. And then the CEO signed something, quick, deliberate movements of his hands. Confusion rippled across the table. No one understood. Except Maya. He was asking her, "Is this yours?" Her breath caught. Her heart pounded so loud she thought the room could hear it. She froze, torn between fear and truth. She could stay silent, keep her head down, survive another day. Or she could stand, risking everything she had worked for. The moment stretched, unbearable. Her fingers tightened around the pen until it nearly snapped. And then, she rose. Her voice shook at first, but steadied with every word. She explained how she had drafted the proposal, how she had researched late into the night, how she had submitted it only to be told it wasn't good enough. She didn't accuse. She didn't shout. She simply told the truth. The room shifted instantly. Some faces hardened, others turned pale. The executive who had stolen her work stammered, his confidence unraveling. But the CEO said nothing. Not yet. His silence was louder than any words. After the meeting, Maya was summoned. Her heart raced as she walked the long corridor toward the CEO's office. She imagined every possibility, being fired, blacklisted, humiliated. Inside, the room was quiet. The CEO sat behind his desk, his hands folded. Slowly, he signed, with deliberate clarity, "I remember you. You helped me. No one else did." Her eyes filled with tears she fought to hold back. He continued, his hands steady, his gaze unwavering, "You showed respect. Humanity. That matters here." For the first time in weeks, she felt seen, not as an intern, not as a token, but as a person. But just as quickly, the door opened. Her supervisor entered, face tight with forced composure. He tried to spin the situation, painting Maya as overstepping, exaggerating, misinterpreting. Words rolled like a defense rehearsed in advance. The CEO listened, silent, expression unreadable. The room crackled with tension. And then, with a single gesture, the CEO dismissed the supervisor. No argument. No explanation. Just dismissal. The man's face drained as he realized what had just happened. He left, the door closing behind him. Maya stood frozen, barely able to process. The CEO turned back to her. His signs were slower now, heavier. "What you face here is not new. But you must decide, silence or truth. Truth is costly. But silence costs more." Her chest rose and fell. She wanted to believe his words were protection, but she knew too well, racism did not vanish with one powerful ally. The system was deeper than any one man. And yet, this was a turning point. The injustice she endured had been dragged into the light. The question now was, what would happen next? The following week, whispers filled the office again. Executives shuffled nervously, meetings ran longer, emails grew sharper. It was clear, change was coming. Maya felt it too. The stolen proposal, the cruel notes, the endless dismissal, none of it could stay hidden anymore. The CEO had seen enough. But with exposure came danger. Some avoided her. Others glared openly, as though she had betrayed an unspoken code by daring to speak. It wasn't just about her proposal anymore. It was about something larger, power, privilege, and the fragile order of the workplace. And that order was cracking. One afternoon, she returned to her desk to find it ransacked. Papers scattered, drawers left open. Nothing was stolen, but everything was touched, invaded, violated. On her chair sat another note, sharper than the first, "Leave while you can." Fear clawed at her, but anger burned hotter. She clenched the note in her fist, vowing she would not be forced out. Because this was no longer about survival. This was about truth. The next company-wide meeting was unlike any before. The CEO addressed the staff directly, his interpreter standing beside him. He spoke of values, of respect, of integrity. His voice carried weight, each word pressing into the room like a stone. Then he paused. His eyes swept the crowd. And he told the story, not naming names, but everyone knew. The story of a young intern who showed humanity when no one else did. The story of an idea stolen, dismissed, and weaponized against her. The story of silence breaking. The room shifted again. Some faces flushed with shame. Others hardened with defiance. Maya sat, her heart pounding. She had not expected this. She had not asked for it. But the truth was no longer hidden in whispers. It was out in the open, undeniable. The climax of her struggle had arrived. The question that remained was the one that haunted her most: would this moment protect her, or destroy her? Because in that room, in that company, truth was a dangerous thing. The days after the CEO's announcement felt like walking on fragile glass. Conversations stopped when Maya entered the room. Emails were colder, stiffer. Some congratulated her quietly in hallways, their eyes darting nervously to see if anyone noticed. Others looked at her as though she had committed the ultimate betrayal, breaking the silence that kept their world comfortable. But Maya herself was different. The weight she carried for weeks, the invisibility, the dismissal, it had shifted. She was no longer just surviving. She had spoken, and her truth had been heard. The CEO followed through. Policies were reviewed. Committees were formed. Words like inclusion and equity began appearing in memos. Yet Maya knew, policies could not erase the nights she cried alone, the notes that told her she didn't belong, the fear of being erased. Real change wasn't written in documents, it lived in actions. And actions, she realized, were often resisted. Still, something inside her had changed permanently. For the first time, she understood that her voice carried weight, even in rooms designed to silence her. That knowledge was power, and a responsibility. She finished her internship with dignity. The stolen proposal? It was credited back to her, not as a pity gesture but as acknowledgement. Yet she knew the victory was bittersweet. Recognition could not undo the harm, could not erase the deeper truth, that if the CEO hadn't been watching, she might have been erased completely. That was the reality. Injustice didn't crumble in one meeting. Racism didn't vanish because one powerful man chose to listen. It was bigger than that, older, heavier, embedded in walls and whispers, in systems designed to question who belonged and who did not. But Maya's story mattered because it revealed something crucial. It showed how ordinary cruelty, dismissive looks, stolen credit, notes slipped in the dark, was not small at all. It was part of a larger wound, one carried by millions who walk into workplaces, classrooms, and neighborhoods every day and are told in countless ways, "You don't belong here." Maya had faced it in a polished office tower, but her story echoed far beyond those walls. How many others had been silenced? How many brilliant ideas had been buried because their authors weren't seen as worthy? How many acts of kindness had been punished, simply because they came from someone society marked as less? This was bigger than Maya. It was about the young black man pulled over for no reason other than suspicion. The woman followed in a store because her presence was assumed dangerous. The child punished for speaking too loudly, while others were praised for the same energy. Different places, different faces, but the same message: know your place. And yet, Maya's story also carried something more. Hope. Because in that moment, when she chose truth over silence, something shifted. Not just in her, but in those watching. In the executives who had to sit with their shame. In the employees who realized complicity was no longer invisible. And perhaps, even in the CEO, who saw that leadership meant more than profit, it meant choosing humanity when it mattered most. The impact was not just the policies that followed. It was the ripple, the way her courage forced others to look in the mirror. And maybe, that's what makes stories like Maya's so powerful. They remind us that racism doesn't always arrive in sirens or shouted slurs. Sometimes, it arrives in silence, in stolen ideas, in laughter that cuts deeper than words. Sometimes, it arrives in the spaces where people pretend not to see. But they also remind us of this: silence is a choice. And truth, even when costly, has the power to break that silence. Maya's story is not the end. It is a question left hanging in the air for all of us. Because today, somewhere, another young intern walks into an office that was not built for her. Another voice is dismissed. Another kindness is punished. Another truth waits to be spoken. The question is, when it happens again, will we choose to look away? Or will we finally decide that enough is enough? The choice isn't just Maya's. It's ours.